Hi everyone, I'm Yushang on behalf of my co-authors Fanxu Meng, Professor Fiona Fiona, and Professor Ri LC. This is our work on collaborative cultural heritage with GenAI in virtual reality. If you ask two people to describe the same street in Shanghai, you might get two completely different answers. One sees narrow lanes with steaming breakfast shops. The other sees glassy skyscrapers. Both are Shanghai. People may carry a separate mental model of the same place. So here's a question. When we sit down together and tell stories about this shared place, how do we negotiate our differences? Not just in words, but through something concrete, something we can both see, point to, and shape together. How do we turn our separate mental models into a shared one? Cultural heritage is more than monuments or archives. It's a narrative process through which people remember everyday places and negotiate shared meanings. It lives in people's stories, the way you remember the street you grew up on, the sounds of a morning market, the feeling of walk through a crowded lane. This invisible heritage is fundamentally communal. It's made up of personal memories that are fragmented between individuals, but become collective through storytelling and negotiating. This is where current tools fall short. Most heritage tools that use generative AI work in 2D flat images that one person looks at alone. They position people as viewers of predefined stories, not as active co-creators. What if we could give people a shared 3D space to build their memories together, to walk through them, move things around, and negotiate their different perspectives? That's what we did. We combined GenAI with VR to create a shared environment where pairs of participants co-construct their cultural heritage memories. We grounded this study in Shanghai's Haipai culture, shaped by over a century of East-West exchange. Here's how it works. Participants describe what they want through verbal prompts. These go into our GenAI backend. The generated models are imported into a shared VR scene where both participants can place, resize, and manipulate them. We also trained a custom LoRa model on local Haipai architecture. Let me show you what this actually looks like in practice. The participants were exploring the street that they built together. Participants were co-creating and manipulating the 3D models that they created together. Participants were adding details from their living experience to a breakfast shop. Now let's move on to our results and the findings. As the example here, P3 generated a simple breakfast shop. The moment P4 saw it, she immediately recalled there was always a big steamer at the entrance, steaming hot. They refined the prompt together, then dragged the models closer to recreate the feeling of a crowded morning market. Participants didn't just look at their heritage, they walked into it to feel whether the width and density matches their lived experience. As P4 reflected in the interview, it was hard to describe the atmosphere, but when we move them closer, it feels right. What this tells us is that designing cultural heritage in immersive space is not just about visual accuracy. It's about reenacting the spatial relationships, density, scale that define the community's emotional bond to the place. We also found that spatial manipulation served as a negotiation tactic. When P12 felt a sign clashed with the historical gate they had built, she didn't argue. She simply dragged the sign to the side. Her partner accepted without a word. Moving an object was a proposal. Leaving it was an agreement. In another case as pictures, one participant kept describing the French concession style, but her partner couldn't picture it. So she generated a 3D model and invited her partner to work around it together. The partner later reflected, "When she generated that model and I could work around it, it was like she opened a door and let me walk directly into her memory." Here, the AI-generated 3D models function as boundary objects, shared artifacts that bridge a knowledge gap and turn abstract disagreements into productive negotiation. The value of spatial interaction lies in its ability to smooth conflict and facilitate nonverbal consensus, turning the virtual environment from a visualization tool into a social space. But this process is not without risks. When participants had conflicting visions, GenAI sometimes acted as a mediator. P17 wanted old alleyways. P18 wanted a modern metropolis. They co-authored a prompt, and the AI blended both ideas. They said it captured Shanghai's embracing spirit. That sounds positive. But here's the tension. When the AI failed to generate a building with a cat-shaped neon sign and produced only the sign, the pair lacked the visual style. They abandoned their original memory and adopted neon style as a new creative direction. The resulting narrative was driven by the AI's output, not by what they actually remembered. When GenAI produces outputs that deviate from a participant's intent, there is a risk that the generated content begins to shape the memory rather than represent it. Memory is not a fixed record. Each act of recall is an act of reconstruction, but heritage systems should be designed with this risk in mind. We also found that the base model generated stereotypical outputs. When asked for Shanghai buildings, the model produced exaggerated elements, overwhelming red lanterns, upturned brackets. One participant reacted, "This is too Western. It looks like a building from the underworld." A model trained on globally aggregated data will systematically underrepresent local cultural forms. When we switch to the LoRa model fine-tuned on Haipai architecture, participants could direct their cognitive effort toward memory and narrative, rather than correcting stylistic errors. The LoRa worked well for our case, but one model cannot cover all local styles. Future work should explore participatory approaches where communities curate their own training data. Heritage is not just what you see, it's what you feel when you walk through it. For urban heritage, the manipulation of spatial structure is as crucial as the rendering of texture. Spatial actions serve as a negotiation tactic. The virtual environment becomes a social space where people negotiate collective memories. GenAI does not just represent memory, it might redirect it. Heritage systems should provide participants with tools to reflect on how their narratives are formed, rather than assuming the output faithfully mirrors what was remembered. And last, locally tuned models are essential. Western-centric AI models do not merely produce inaccurate outputs for non-Western users. They actively pull users' expressions toward dominant cultural norms. This work suggests that cultural heritage is not a fixed physical form, but a continuous narrative process that can be actively co-shaped by people. The negotiation itself becomes a form of heritage expression. This study demonstrates that design is a process that unlocks people's ability to elicit and surface their relationships with the cultural heritage of places in their lives, actively shaping their collective heritage together. This work was done at Studio for Narrative Spaces, City University of Hong Kong, under the supervision of Professor Wei L.C. and the guidance of Professor Fiona Na. I'd like to thank all my co-authors for their support and our participants who made this study possible. Please check out our paper for more details and feel free to reach out. Thank you.